The silent arrival. The vast darkness of space stretched endlessly, broken only by the distant flashes of battle. Two massive alien fleets faced each other, their weapons primed, their warriors ready to die. The Zarkai, a reptilian species with powerful warships, floated on one side. Opposing them were the Vortons, a technologically advanced but ruthless race. Their war had raged for decades, each side unwilling to surrender. Admiral Xelvar of the Zarkai fleet watched from his command deck, his scaled hands clenched behind his back as he observed the battlefield. "This is it," he murmured. "The final battle." The Vortons had grown too bold, too aggressive. Today, he would end them. But before he could give the order to attack, something unexpected happened. A new ship appeared in the battlefield, one that belonged to neither side. It was unlike any vessel ever seen before. Sleek, heavily armored, silent. It didn't announce itself. It didn't send any transmissions. It simply drifted into position, placing itself directly between the two warring fleets. A murmur of confusion spread through the Zarkai bridge. "Who dares enter our war zone?" one of the officers growled. Admiral Xelvar narrowed his reptilian eyes. "Magnify the image." The view screen zoomed in on the ship. Its hull was dark, its surface covered in unknown plating. There were no markings, no insignia, no weapons visible. Yet, something about it felt dangerous. On the other side of the battlefield, the Vorton commander, Lord Krax, stared at the vessel with equal confusion. His people were known for their intelligence and advanced scanners. Yet every attempt to scan the new ship failed. "It's jamming us," his science officer reported. Lord Krax's 6 eyes blinked rapidly in frustration. "Impossible," he hissed. No species had technology superior to the Vortons. "Fire a warning shot," he ordered. A plasma bolt erupted from a Vorton destroyer, streaking toward the unknown ship at deadly speed. But then, something incredible happened. The unknown ship moved. Not just moved, it vanished for a fraction of a second, reappearing a few kilometers away. The plasma bolt sailed harmlessly past, missing its target completely. Shock rippled through both fleets. Did it just teleport? A Zarkai officer whispered in disbelief. Admiral Xelvar's tail twitched. "No," he said, voice grim. "It's just fast." Before anyone could react, a transmission finally came from the unknown vessel. It was a simple message, transmitted in both Zarkai and Vorton languages. "Brace for impact." Silence fell over both fleets. The voice was deep, controlled. It was human. Admiral Xelvar's scales bristled. He had heard rumors about humans before. A small, insignificant species from the far edge of the galaxy. A race that was considered weak, primitive. But if that were true, how had they built this ship? Lord Krax wasn't impressed. "They dare challenge us." He spat. "Fire again. This time, destroy them." The Vorton fleet obeyed. Dozens of ships fired simultaneously, unleashing a storm of plasma and railgun rounds. The space around the unknown ship exploded in fire and energy. The human vessel disappeared once again, dodging the attack with ease. Then it moved. In an instant, it positioned itself directly above the lead Vorton battleship. It was close now, too close. A second transmission followed. "Stand down, or be removed." For the first time in his life, Lord Krax felt something unfamiliar. Fear. He gritted his teeth. "What do they want?" he growled. Back on the Zarkai flagship, Admiral Xelvar had the same question. Why was this ship here? What were the humans planning? He didn't like this. The war between the Zarkai and the Vortons was their own conflict. No outsiders should interfere. But as he stared at the human ship, a dark realization crept into his mind. This wasn't an ordinary vessel. This was a warship. A warship that was more advanced than anything in the Zarkai or Vorton fleets, and it had chosen to reveal itself now. Admiral Xelvar's claws tapped against his command chair. For the first time in the history of the war, neither side knew what to do next. The silent arrival had changed everything. The warning shot. The battlefield stood frozen in uneasy silence. The unknown warship, the human warship, hovered in the void, untouched, unbothered by the chaos around it. It had dodged firepower from two of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy with absolute ease. And now, it was waiting. Admiral Xelvar of the Zarkai fleet sat motionless, his golden reptilian eyes fixed on the impossible ship before him. It had given a warning. Stand down, or be removed. But no one in the galaxy had ever feared humans before. They were supposed to be weak, primitive, irrelevant. Yet this ship was here, and every instinct in Xelvar's body screamed that it was a threat unlike any other. On the other side of the battlefield, Lord Krax of the Vortons was not so cautious. "This is an insult," he snarled, his 6 black eyes narrowing. "One ship dares to stand between 2 great fleets. Destroy them. Now." The Vorton fleet obeyed instantly. Dozens of warships locked onto the human vessel, their weapons charging up for a full barrage. No more warning shots. No more games. A single order echoed through the Vorton fleet. Fire. The darkness of space erupted in flame. Plasma beams, railgun slugs, missile swarms, a storm of death raced toward the lone human warship. The combined firepower was enough to obliterate a planet, let alone a single ship. Admiral Xelvar washed, his breath caught in his throat. Even that ship couldn't survive this. And yet, it vanished. Not in an explosion, not in debris. It simply wasn't there anymore. 1 second, the ship was locked in the sights of every targeting system. The next, nothing. The Vorton projectiles streaked into the empty void, colliding with nothing but open space. Confusion swept across the battlefield. Where did it go? Then, it reappeared, right behind the lead Vorton battleship. Lord Krax barely had time to react. His command deck trembled as alarms screamed in his ears. How had they moved that fast? It wasn't teleportation. It was something worse. It was speed beyond reason. A new transmission echoed across the battlefield. The human's voice was calm, controlled, unshaken. Last warning. Then the human ship fired. It wasn't a barrage. It wasn't a storm of missiles or lasers. It was a single shot. One precise, calculated shot. A blinding blue lance of energy erupted from the warship's hull, traveling faster than any weapon ever recorded. It struck the lead Vorton battleship in an instant, but it didn't explode. It stopped. The energy wrapped around the battleship like a cage of light, crackling and twisting around its hull. For a moment, the mighty Vorton warship froze in space, its engines flickering, its shields collapsing. And then, in eerie silence, it crumbled. Not in fire, not in destruction. The ship simply came apart, disintegrating atom by atom, until there was nothing left. No debris, no wreckage, only a haunting void where a Vorton battleship had once been. The entire battlefield went silent. Admiral Xelvar felt his blood run cold. That was not normal weaponry. That was something else. Something terrifying. The remaining Vorton ships did not fire again. For the first time in their history, they hesitated. Lord Krax gripped his command chair, his 6 eyes wide in disbelief. What kind of weapon was that? His science officer's hands shook over his console. I don't know, he whispered. That wasn't destruction. That was erasure. Admiral Xelvar exhaled slowly, his mind racing. The humans had made their point. This wasn't just a warship. It was a statement. It had no allies, no reinforcements, just a single vessel standing alone between 2 great war fleets. And yet, it was winning. The human voice returned, calm as ever. Leave, or we will remove you. A warship had arrived on the battlefield. But now, it was the battlefield that was afraid. The human gambit. A tense, unnatural silence gripped the battlefield. For the first time in history, the mighty Vorton fleet hesitated. Their warships, once poised to dominate the battle, now held their fire. Even Admiral Xelvar of the Zarkai fleet, a veteran of countless wars, found himself frozen, watching, waiting. Because the human warship, that impossible, terrifying warship, was still there, unmoved, unafraid. On board the VHS Revenant, Captain Elias Carter sat in his command chair, watching the battlefield unfold. His face was calm, but his sharp blue eyes held the weight of absolute confidence. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Rains, exhaled. "They're scared, sir." Carter nodded. "Good. Let's see if they're smart too." Across the void, Lord Crax of the Vortons slammed a clawed fist against his console. His voice was a low, furious snarl. "We do not run," he spat. "I want firing solutions now." His officers hesitated. My lord, that weapon. We still don't understand what it." "I don't care if it's powered by the gods themselves," Crax roared. "No single ship threatens the Vorton Dominion. Fire." His fleet obeyed. But this time, the human ship moved first. The counterattack. Without warning, the Revenant disappeared again. No flash of light, no jump signatures, just gone. And then, chaos. On the edge of the Zarkai fleet, a Vorton destroyer exploded without warning. No incoming fire, no detected weapons, just erased. A second ship vanished in the same instant, then a third. Panic ripped through the Vorton ranks. They're inside our formation," the Vorton officer screamed. Lord Crax's jaw clenched. Impossible. No ship, no matter how advanced, could move that fast. Could it? But before he could react, a voice crackled into his command deck. The human's voice. Calm. Collected. Unshaken. "Do you understand now?" Crax felt his blood turn cold. Then, the Revenant reappeared, right in front of his command ship. Its weapons hummed, glowing with deadly energy. "Last chance, Vortons," Carter said. "Stand down, or disappear." Lord Crax had never felt fear before, until now. The breaking point. For the first time in his life, Lord Crax hesitated. The VHS Revenant loomed in the void, its sleek black hull reflecting the dying embers of the destroyed Vorton ships. It had no escorts, no reinforcements, yet it stood unshaken in front of the largest war fleet the Dominion had ever assembled. And now its weapons were locked onto his command ship. A silence stretched across the battlefield, thick with an emotion Crax had never associated with his people. Fear. His claws gripped the armrests of his throne-like chair, but for once, his warriors were silent. No war cries, no eagerness for battle, just the quiet, tense realization that something was very wrong. Because the humans weren't fighting a war. They were delivering a message. Inside the Revenant, Captain Elias Carter watched the Vorton flagship through the viewing screen, his expression unreadable. He could see the hesitation, the doubt, the realization that brute force would not win today. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Rains, leaned in slightly. "They're stalling." Carter gave the faintest smirk. "Good. Let's push them a little further." He tapped a control panel on his chair. "Lieutenant Kane, give them a demonstration." A few decks below, Chief Weapons Officer Kane grinned as his fingers danced over the controls. "Aye, Captain." Executing precision strike. Outside, the Revenant made its move. Without warning, a blue energy pulse rippled across the battlefield. But this wasn't an attack, it was a statement. Because every single Vorton ship in the fleet suddenly lost power. Engines died. Shields flickered out. Weapons went cold. A whole armada, frozen in space. The Revenant, however, remained untouched. Lord Crax's eyes widened in horror as the lights on his own ship dimmed, his control panels flashing with urgent red warnings. "We've lost power," an officer barked. "Shields offline. Weapons offline. Everything offline." Crax's breathing was heavy. "How?" His science officer's hands were shaking. It's a dampening field, my lord. A level of electromagnetic interference beyond anything we've ever seen. They're not disabling us. They're holding us in place. Krax's jaw clenched. Powerless. Defenseless. Trapped. The human's voice returned. Now, do you understand? Krax felt his pride crack like brittle glass. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a lesson. And the lesson was simple. You never should have made humans your enemy. Across the battlefield, Admiral Xelvar of the Zarkai fleet exhaled sharply. His own ships still had power. The humans had spared them. His reptilian eyes flicked between the Revenant and the paralyzed Vorten fleet. One ship, one human warship had brought an Empire's armada to its knees. Slowly, his claws hovered over the fleet-wide communicator. And then, in a decision that would alter the course of history, he powered down his weapons. Zarkai fleet, disengage. Murmurs rippled through his bridge, but no one objected. They had seen enough. The Zarkai ships peeled away, their weapons cold, their engines humming as they left the battlefield. They had learned the lesson. Now, it was up to the Vortens to decide if they would survive long enough to learn it too. On the Vorten flagship, Lord Krax sat in stunned silence. His mighty fleet was paralyzed. His enemies had abandoned the fight. And his pride, his entire belief that the Vorten Dominion was the most powerful force in the galaxy, was now in ruins. The human voice came one last time. Surrender, Krax, or be erased. His claws curled into fists. His entire body trembled, with rage, with humiliation, and with the weight of a choice he had never thought he'd have to make. Surrender, or extinction. And for the first time in Vorten history, a warlord lowered his flag. The unthinkable surrender. A silence so profound it felt like the universe itself had paused. Lord Krax's clawed fingers hovered over the command console. His warriors watched him, eyes filled with disbelief. The thought of surrender had never entered the Vorten mind. They were conquerors, an empire forged in war, never in retreat. And yet, his fleet was frozen. His weapons were useless. His enemy, one single human warship, was standing unscathed in the void, waiting for his decision. The humans had given him a choice: surrender or disappear. Krax clenched his jaw, feeling his pride burn. The weight of his ancestors, the blood of countless victories, they all screamed at him to fight, to resist, to die before bending the knee. But then his eyes drifted to the battlefield. The wreckage of his fleet, the silence of his officers, the cold, unrelenting reality. He exhaled through gritted teeth and finally pressed the button. This is Lord Krax of the Vorten Dominion. His voice, once filled with power, now sounded hollow. We surrender. A sharp intake of breath from his bridge crew. Disbelief, shock, horror. A Vorten warrior stood up violently, knocking over his chair. My lord, you cannot. Krax's gaze snapped to him, and in a flash, he drew his ceremonial blade and plunged it through the warrior's chest. The room fell into stunned silence. The warrior gasped, looking at his leader in betrayal before collapsing to the floor. His blood pooled at Krax's feet. The message was clear. The Dominion does not tolerate failure, Krax growled. And today we have failed. On board the Revenant, Captain Elias Carter leaned back in his chair, listening to the transmission. Lieutenant Rains blinked. Did they just actually surrender? Carter didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He simply nodded. They did. The bridge was silent. No cheers, no relief, because they all knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. Sir, Rains said cautiously, the Zarkai fleet is still in the area. They haven't left completely. Carter turned his attention to the scanners. Admiral Xelvar's ships had disengaged, but they remained at the edge of the system, watching, waiting. And that meant one thing. This wasn't just a war. This was the beginning of something far bigger. Carter exhaled, Open a channel to Xelvar. The weight of a decision. Admiral Xelvar sat in his command chair, his reptilian features unreadable as he stared at the human ship on his view screen. The Revenant. The ship that had brought the Vorten to their knees. A human ship. A species that, until now, had been seen as a minor power in the grand scale of the galaxy. And yet, with a single vessel, they had changed everything. Xelvar's second-in-command, a younger officer, shifted nervously. "Sir, what are your orders?" The admiral remained silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "Hold position." "Sir." Xelvar's eyes flickered to the Vorten fleet, now powerless and humiliated. The old way of the galaxy was crumbling. And humanity. They weren't just another species. They were something else entirely. A new war begins. Back on the Revenant, Carter watched as the Vorten fleet slowly drifted, their systems beginning to reactivate one by one. But they wouldn't fight again. Not today. Rains leaned over. "What do we do now, sir?" Carter's fingers tapped on the armrest of his chair. His gaze was distant, thinking ahead. Today had been a victory, yes. But a war like this, it was never won in a single battle. "Prepare a message for Earth Command," Carter said. "Tell them we've sent the first warning shot." Rains frowned. "And what about the Vortens?" Carter's expression hardened. "They'll be back." His gaze turned to the distant Zarkai fleet. "And next time, we won't be fighting just them." The whisper of war. The surrender of the Vorten Dominion should have ended the battle. But battles are only moments in war, never the conclusion. Captain Elias Carter knew this. As the Revenant held position in the silent void, his fingers drummed lightly against the armrest. His crew was quiet, watching their screens with unease. The Vortens had bowed today, but the galaxy was still watching. And watching meant calculating. It meant waiting. It meant planning for revenge. "Sir." Lieutenant Raines's voice was steady but laced with tension. New movement from the Zarkai fleet. They're adjusting formation. Carter leaned forward. The Zarkai were predators, always circling, waiting for weakness. Their ships didn't attack, but they didn't retreat either. Instead, they sent a message. A challenge from the shadows. The holographic screen flickered to life, revealing Admiral Xelvar. His reptilian features were unreadable, golden eyes staring unblinking at Carter. "You've changed the balance today, human," Xelvar said, voice calm but heavy with meaning. "But you misunderstand something." Carter arched a brow. "And what's that?" Xelvar leaned forward slightly. The Vortens were never the true threat. Carter's jaw tightened. He had suspected as much. The Vortens were brutes, powerful but predictable. But the Zarkai, they had been silent observers, watching humanity from the edges of every battlefield. "You crippled the Dominion," Xelvar continued, "and now you expect the galaxy to fear you." A pause. "But what if I told you, you've only made humanity a target?" The words hung heavy in the air. Carter didn't flinch. "We were always a target." Xelvar's thin lips curled slightly, a predator's amusement. "Perhaps, but before today, the galaxy saw you as nothing more than a species learning to crawl." His gaze sharpened. "Now they will come to break you before you learn to run." The signal that shook the galaxy. Hours later, back in his quarters, Carter sat alone, staring at the screen in front of him. A single message pulsed on the monitor. An intercepted transmission. Encrypted. Urgent. It wasn't from Earth Command. It wasn't from the Vortens. It was from a ghost. Carter's fingers hovered over the console before finally playing the audio. Static. Then. "Revenant, this is Outpost Epsilon, requesting immediate response. We have visual on." A sharp burst of static. Then, a voice barely above a whisper. "They're already here." The transmission cut out. Carter's blood ran cold. He stood abruptly, hitting his communicator. "Bridge, this is Carter. Prepare for an FTL jump." Destination, sir. Raines's voice came through. Carter's jaw clenched. Outpost Epsilon. And if his instincts were right, if that transmission meant what he feared, then the war they had just stumbled into was far bigger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The war nobody knew existed. The Revenant tore through the void, its FTL engines burning like a comet streaking toward destiny. The intercepted transmission from Outpost Epsilon still echoed in Captain Carter's mind. They're already here. Who? The Vortons were beaten. The Zarkai were circling, but not attacking. So who was waiting in the dark? Ghost signals in the void. The moment they dropped out of FTL, the alarm screamed. Outpost Epsilon was gone. No debris, no distress beacons, no emergency signals. Just a dead silence. Sir, Lieutenant Raines whispered, scanning the empty coordinates. There should be something here. Carter stood still, watching the vast emptiness ahead. A cold feeling crept into his gut. It was too clean, too perfect. Then the lights flickered. One of the junior officers gasped. Sir, I'm picking up. The ship lurched. The view screen glitched. For a fraction of a second, something huge flickered into existence in front of them, black as the void, edges shifting like mist. Then it was gone. What the hell was that? Raines shouted. Carter's mind raced. A cloaked fleet, a weapon, or something worse. Whatever it was, it had erased an entire human outpost without a trace. And now it was watching them. The unknown enemy. A soft ping echoed through the bridge. A message. No sender. No encryption. Just text, appearing letter by letter. We see you. A pause. Then, leave. Silence. Carter exhaled slowly. His crew was frozen, waiting for his order. They could turn back. They could pretend they never saw this. But then he thought about Earth. About the fleets who would one day come here, unprepared. About how they would disappear just like Outpost Epsilon. His fingers tightened into a fist. Charge the main cannon, he said. Full spread. Fire into the void. Raines hesitated. Sir. Carter's voice was steady. Let's see if ghosts can bleed. When the light pierced the dark, the Revenant's cannons roared, lighting up the abyss with raw energy. The shots streaked forward, toward nothing. Then, impact. Something shimmered. The void itself cracked. And for the first time, they saw it. A fleet of impossible ships, shifting like liquid metal, their hulls covered in unreadable glyphs. Older than the Vortons, older than the Zarkai. Not invaders, not conquerors, something else entirely. And as the first of them turned to face the Revenant, Carter knew. Humanity had just awakened something ancient, something that had been waiting, and now it was ready to fight.